All right, well, good morning and welcome to the Jasper Chamber Legislative Breakfast, as we call it. And I'd like to thank everyone for being here this morning. There's a lot of new faces in the crowd, so I'll explain the process a little bit. There are some snacks and some waters in the back. Help yourself to any of those. And then the way we work this is that we have, hey, Mark, come on in. We have a special guest this morning, our Congressman Mark Messmer. Thank you. Chair up there for you. You're fine. So the way it works is there are some papers on the aisles. If you have a question, I ask that you write the question down and I will read them later. I'm asking you today to only write one question. The last time we had 2 and 3 on a paper, and truthfully, we didn't get through all of them. So to be respectful of everyone, just ask one question, and then we'll pass those down later. Our legislators will tell a little bit about what they're doing. Our state legislators are midway through their session this year. And then I think toward the end, we'll let our Congressman Mark Messmer tell a little bit about what's going on at the national level. So I'd like to invite everyone this morning, if you're able, to please stand and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, so I believe what we'll start with this morning is our State Senator Daryl Schmitt, and we have also with us State Representatives Shane Lindauer and Steve Bartels. So let's thank them for being here this morning. All right, so Daryl, I'm going to give you the microphone. You can use this one. And you can tell about what's been going on. You're midway through the session, so tell us what you've been doing up there the past couple weeks.
Well, to be quite honest, anyway, welcome everybody. Daryl Schmitt. Happy to serve Gibson, Pike, Du Bois, Spencer, Perry, and Crawford counties. If you don't know, I was on the county council here in Du Bois County prior to now. I'm a farmer west of Jasper here, trying to help and trying to be a megaphone for 140,000 people represent us at the state. So I'll go through some of the bills that we had in the first part of the session. Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry. I'm typically loud and I don't need a microphone. But anyway, we'll go through the first half of session was, I'll be quite honest with you, pretty intense. A new learning experience for me, happy to do it. I'll go down through some Senate bills, and I'm going to skip SB 1, and I'll come back to that here in a little bit. But we'll go through the others first. Some of you had the list that came out. You know, SB 2 is Medicaid reform. People are concerned about cuts, to that. The goal is not to cut services. The goal is just to increase efficiencies. There's, in any function, whatever it is, there are inefficiencies and there is some fraud. So the goal of that is to just to reduce fraud in that. The same thing in the healthcare sector. SB 3 working to lower the health costs for everybody. Middleman, pharmacy benefit managers. There's some things in there. There's a lot of bills that we're working on to try to rein in some of the inefficiencies there. Tying with that, SB 480 ties right into SB 3 on health care. That is working to eliminate a lot of the burdensome prior authorizations. Everybody's probably been down that road where you're trying to get authorized for a procedure and it's very cumbersome. Working on SB 480s, working on trying to help with that. SB 4, protecting our water resources. We're fortunate in Indiana that we have an abundant supply of water, but now as there's a lot of industries, things coming in that need a lot of water, very water intense. We're trying to make sure and manage those properly, not trying to move water from one watershed to the other and just trying to responsibly manage those. SB 5 is also trying to work on efficiencies in government. SB 140 also ties in the working on anti-competitive practices with the pharmacy benefit managers. SB 10, if anybody's been following that, it's an election integrity bill. It's not to suppress any type of voter participation. It basically eliminated college IDs being an acceptable form of ID for voting. So you think that's, I guess basically what was happening, there are college students, you could be from any state in the union, you could be anywhere in the world and not really residents of Indiana, but you were being able to vote here, and that's probably not the intent. We don't want people from, different countries being able to, vote and affect our decisions here in Indiana locally. Senate Bill 146, that's an education bill. I'm on the Education Committee. That was working on increasing teacher pay. There is, it raised the minimum of teacher pay up $5,000. SB 324 was increasing penalties for methamphetamine and fentanyl here in Indiana. And then we'll circle back around, and I guess I might as well discuss, should we go ahead and discuss SB 1 now, I guess? Okay, so Senate Bill 1 was, that's, I guess, the monster in the room. There were, its first version was 1.4 million in in tax cuts the first year. When I went to Indianapolis, coming out of local government, I feel a competent understanding of how property taxes work, and I was concerned, as well as all of us were when we saw that coming out. And I wanted to work. I work with leadership, work with everybody, and the people who are actually working on the budgets, and I implored them to show restraint, and we need to. I didn't want to overreact, and I said, let's not overreact. We need to. We need to, take a slower, measured approach, on government. So now where it basically stands, instead of the 1.4 billion, it's 239 million would be a cut in the first year. And then, as a lot of you know, and some you may not know, that the state typically has the maximum levy growth quotient. So what that is that's the amount of revenue that local governments are allowed to increase on an annual basis. Okay, so the plan is, the way SB 1 is right now, there would be a 0% growth in 2026, 1% growth in 2027, and 2% in 2028. So the tax cuts, the people that are, and I guess I'll backtrack a little bit. As constituent surveys, when you guys were going through the surveys, if you participated in that, overwhelmingly, the number one priority was property tax relief. And if you want to look at the survey results, you can go to, all you need to do is Google Daryl Schmitt, and then it'll come up, Indiana Senate Republicans. Click on that, and you can go down on my page, and there's a page just that says 2025 constituent survey results. Click on that, and you'll get all the results for all of the surveys. So the number one driving factor on that was property tax relief. So that's been the driving force why this is. Now, I don't know where we're going to end up yet. On Tuesday, there were two bills heard on the House side. They started at 1:30 and they finished at 10:30. I don't know the results of that. Where we're gonna land. Senate Bill 1 will get modified by the House. So, but the overall goal is, instead of hurting local government with drastic cuts up front, it's more of a small cut up front, but then the rest, the 238 million, but then the rest would be limiting future growth. So you're kind of getting the same result, but it lets us manage it better, okay? And everybody has their opinion on what's too much and what's not enough. I think I've been trying to work within the system we have to create the best possible results possible. So this is This is less upfront, but when you take your revenue, reduce revenue going forward, it'll be a lot easier for us to manage as local governments. And I always tell everybody, and I just want to be honest, that's the only way I know how to be, but anyway, if you look at this from the big picture, I've given this a lot of thought, and this is not a Republican problem, it's not a Democrat problem. With COVID, there was a lot of, sorry, my phone was ringing in my ears. I've got hearing aids. With COVID, we ended up with a lot of concern whether we were basically going to cripple society, cripple our economy. So we put a lot of money in government, and we might have overdid a little bit, but it was, nobody's ever been in COVID before. We have no idea what we were getting into. Now, where we're at now is not sustainable as far as an economy. Every 100 days, our federal debt increases by $1 trillion. So just back figure that. That's $10 billion every day that we're going further in debt. $492 trillion was collected in revenue in 2024, and we spent $6.75 trillion, $1.83 trillion deficit. The annual interest on debt is the fastest growing line in our budget at $1 trillion, more than the annual cost of the US military and Medicare. So, as much as we don't want to have losses of services, we have high expectations, as we should. I want to look at this as a big picture where we're going to probably have to do something. There's going to have to be sacrifices at the federal level, at the state level, and at the local level. So we have to find this balance. The story's not written at the state level. And this is hard that, the state is dictating revenues at the federal level, okay? I want to look at this as the goal is that we all should be able to try to find, we all need to work together to find some way to cut, okay? We will, I'm working to try to minimize that cut, but yet give people the property tax relief they need. And the goal is to not find replacement revenue, if possible, shrink government as much as we can. Local income taxes are a possibility if we have to fill in the gaps, okay? I am actually trying to work and a proponent of, if we can break the lit taxes down further. I've been, this is just Daryl talking and Daryl's opinion, that if we could create, flexibility for the municipalities, if we could break it down in more local units, because it's hard to find agreement amongst on co-ed counties between the different municipalities and county government. So some of those things I'm still working behind the scenes to try to minimize the impact. We don't want to impact services at the local level. We don't want to impact municipalities or schools' ability to pay their bonds, but we need to come to the realization, I think, that there has to be a little bit of, there has to be shrinking. And if we all kind of work together with that goal in mind to try to minimize the impact of services, but shrink government, because $10 billion further in debt every day, as the United States is not sustainable long term. There could be far harder decisions to be made down the road if we don't start making smaller cuts and sacrifices now. So we'll have some discussions here in a minute, but that's kind of my look, and I don't mean to be gloom and doom, but there's serious things that we have to look at. There's a lot of positive things that are going on too, but that's kind of where I'm standing now.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Shane Lindauer. I'm State Representative for District 63, includes portions of Du Bois, Davies, Pike, and Martin counties. This is my 8th session as a state legislator. I'm chairman of Natural Resources Committee and also on Roads and Transportation Committee. So I just want to take the opportunity to thank you all for being here today and taking the time to to educate yourselves on the process and allow us to be a part of that as well. And thanks to Nancy and the chamber and her helpers in the back room for helping with the process as well. So I'll run down a few of the things here. Just for edification, I think we had a group up in Indianapolis this week, and a question I get asked fairly regularly is, what is a big surprise that I see at the state level? And for me, it's always been, I think, the vast majority of the bills that we pass are bipartisan. There's really not a lot of bickering and consternation that happens at the state level. Just some quick facts on that. We had 689 bills filed. I think we talked about that the first go around here. 179 of those passed out of the House and are on to the Senate, so about a 26% pass rate, if you will. So the vast majority of the bills filed died, which is probably a good thing. Except for mine, of course. So the Senate had roughly a 31% pass rate that's come over to the House of the 507. Yeah, there you go. The bipartisan nature that I mentioned, 93% of the bills that passed the House during the first half did so with bipartisan support. So that's 168 of the 179 bills passed had at least a Republican and a Democrat that passed the bills. 81% did so with fewer than 15 no votes, and 53% of the bills passed unanimously. So just goes to show, like I said, for the most part, we I think get along pretty well. I mean, there's a handful of issues at the state level that cause consternation on a bipartisan level, and the vast majority of things we do up there, we work pretty well together, I believe. So personally, I had 9 bills I discussed for the first half of session. I've been now assigned or a sponsor of 5 bills. So the bills that come from the House or from the Senate to the House, we are now the sponsor of that bill. We kind of help carry it through the rest of the process, and the bills that went from the House to the Senate, they have a sponsor over there. So I'm not the author of the Senate bills now. I'm the sponsor, just a little in the weeds thing there. So I'm the sponsor on 5 bills that came over from the Senate, and a co-sponsor on one of those bills. I think Representative Bartels here is quite a bit heavier load, it sounds like, coming over. So a couple of the bills that I'm sponsor on are Senate Bill 28. Senator Schmitt mentioned the water issue that we face as a state. There was a water study done last couple years, and it did indicate that Indiana is a very water, we're water rich. We're in a pretty good spot, generally speaking, especially relative to, you hear a lot about from states out west that really struggle with water issues. We are pretty water rich. Having said that, there have been issues, fortunately not around here, but in north of Indianapolis, Lebanon, and some of those areas where there have been some, and increasingly so, those will continue to be an issue, where you have big users of water, people that come in, whether it be AI data centers, these kind of places are very water intensive in their usage, and so there's a fear that as they drain or start using and pulling from aquifers and things like that, what does it do to people who are existing users of those things, farmers in particular? And so Farm Bureau had a bill this year, Senate Bill 28, that looks at kind of groundwater emergencies that Senator Schmitt mentioned a little while ago as well, and how do we study those and how do we stay on top of those better so we don't have trouble going down the road. I'm also a sponsor on Senate Bill 280, which deals with hunting rifle cartridges. It's kind of a little bit of a, I'm happy to answer questions about it later, but basically just dealing with hunting rifle cartridges on public grounds. Excuse me. I had in the first half a Parents' Bill of Rights bill. It was House Bill 16. There was a companion bill that was Senate Bill 143. So that issue is going to be moving in Senate Bill 143, of which I am the sponsor. That's going to be getting a hearing on the 24th, I think, of this month. And basically what that does is it gives parents a cause of action against any kind of governmental agency, whether it be the state, DCS, a school, law enforcement, anybody that unduly burdens parents in the parental rights of their kids. So in testimony on the Senate side, there were some really difficult testimony from parents. So one was parents had their child, they took their daughter to the hospital. She had basically a congenital condition but the hospital accused them of abuse and just took the kids. There was no trial. Took the daughter. I'm sorry, not kids. Took the daughter. No trial. Nothing like that took place. And really, the daughter wasn't getting proper treatment, wasn't getting diagnosed, and the parents had no recourse after that. And so this basically just establishes what we all should believe is a fundamental right, that the parents are primarily responsible for their children, and right now there's really no recourse as far as parents being able to come back at the DCS, for instance, right? So that's in a nutshell what this bill is working to address. Sorry, I lost my computer, went dark here. Also had a bill on the first half. It was House Bill 1612. Is now also a companion bill, is Senate Bill 346, which establishes a grant program for specifically rural Indiana to try to entice businesses to stay and scale up, so to speak, in rural parts of the state. And so that's it provides a grant through private equity first, and then the private equity firms get a tax credit after year 3. So happy to answer more questions on that. That actually came out of the governor's office. And there's another bill I had, House Bill 1615, which also has a companion bill, Senate Bill 465, which deals with Crane and Westgate and certified tech parks. And so we'll be working on that, moving that one through on the Senate side. There's a Senate bill that I'm co-sponsor on. It's Senate Bill 289, which deals with fair employment and fair education, otherwise kind of known as the DEI stuff, addressing some of those things. So looking at co-sponsoring that. I know Representative Bartels has got some stuff on the budget too. But I would say, just broadly speaking regarding the budget, the House Bill 1001 that passed out is on to the Senate now. We trimmed, seeking, as passed anyway, out of the House, about 5% from the agency budgets, something that I think the House Republicans, have been committed to. I'm sure the Senate will take a crack at things as well. The governor's been committed to, looking at ways that, again, Senate Bill 1 is going to be asking some locals to tighten the belt, it sounds like. And I think at the state, we're doing so as well. So the new dollars spent represent just under 2% of the $47 billion plus budget. So while there's going to be an increase of a spend at the state level, it's going to be just south of 2% on that. So roughly 4% new K through 12 funding over the biennium is going to be increased in that. The big concern at the state level for the budget is Medicaid spending. Is it 60-some% increase, I think, right, Steve? About a 64% increase jump in Medicaid spending over the last several years. And so, that's been a big issue. I've talked to some of you in this room about that issue. It's a concern. Senator Schmitt mentioned it. How do we get on top of that? Because obviously that type of growth is not sustainable going forward. And so looking at ways, and those are tough conversations to have, right? But looking at ways to make sure the most vulnerable families, the most vulnerable people get that funding, because growing at this rate, it's not sustainable, and it's not going to be there for anybody at that point. And so that's, I think, a big concern going forward at the state level, and the amount of new users of the Medicaid system. And so when you look at K through 12 education and higher education, we're at 55% of the state budget is just on education. You look at Medicaid, that's another 22%. Health and Human Services is another 9%. I bring this up because, I've heard, some folks say, well, you guys need to, tighten your belt more at the state level, what you're spending at the state level. So in the general pie of the $47 billion budget, general government and capital projects comprise about 8% of the overall budget. And so everything else is public safety, corrections, health and human services, Medicaid, or education. That's the other, 98% of the budget. So when you start talking about cutting, those conversations get difficult real quick. Where does that cut come out of, right? And so some tough conversations at the local level, but we're going to have some tough conversations at the state level as well. So I'm happy to take questions when we're done. And again, thank you all for being here.
Well, thank you. Again, thank you for being here. My name is Steve Bartels. I represent Du Bois, Crawford, Perry, Orange, and Spencer counties. I'm on public policy. I'm also on courts and criminal code, currently serving as chairman of Veterans Affairs and Public Safety, which includes Department of Homeland Security. I won't touch too much on the budget. I think Shane kind of covered it real well. Just remember that no matter what, we will always have a balanced budget. And this cut that we're trying to do is from an agency standpoint. So we're looking at them and say, hey, look, you're going to have to cut some employees potentially, don't hire, those kind of things. Maybe merge some things that with other agencies, what we're looking at doing with the executive branch also. So we're going to keep through that. House Bill 1002 is near and dear to my heart, as you know, and I've spoken to lots of people. My whole goal in my tenure in the House of Representatives would be to continuously reduce government. So I'm a big fan of this reducing the regulations to K through 12. I think it's a good start. I think we can keep looking at that, and we can start taking stuff off the teachers just like we do anything else. 1003, 1004, kind of our agenda bills. This transparency healthcare and trying to make sure that we cut healthcare pricing and billing. I'm always cautious in what we do because I think it's, I hope there's no bankers in here, but it's just kind of like the banking industry, right? I mean, when you put some pressure on them to lower some stuff, they're still going to figure out where to get their money. So sometimes I think that the root of the healthcare issue is making sure that the cost in the beginning to these healthcare providers is monitored. And what I mean by that is we all know we can go buy the same Band-Aid at CVS cheaper than the hospital can buy that. So those are the kind of things we start. I think we're looking at it at a different angle, but that's just saying we're going to keep putting some pressure on that. 1007, it's basically trying to meet the energy needs. We are not decreasing our energy needs in the United States and nor in Indiana. We're continuously increasing them. So we've got to be vigilant in all their options of energy production. So I'm very supportive of that. A couple bills, several bills that I've done this year is the National Guard bill, which is House Bill 1111. A lot of people don't realize this, but we used to be 4th in the nation per capita for National Guard members. We've slipped down to 9. During that time period, when we were number 4, we actually got a whole bunch of money to stand up a separate infantry brigade, which is huge in the United States. It provided a lot of money to our state and provided our soldiers with a lot of more opportunities when it comes to the military. But one of the things that happened through this is we've learned that the United States and our state, depending on our National Guardsmen, a lot more for things. For an example, we've got some down at Texas doing border, but they're not federally activated. So we activate them from the state, and there's no protections. And so what this does is actually, when they become on state orders, they become state employees. So what does that mean? So it means that if they actually get injured or have some kind of illness based on their in line of the duty, that they can actually have workman's comp, because currently they do not. The other thing is, if they're killed in the line of duty, they actually have 0 death benefits from the state. So this puts them in line with all state employees, and they get that $100,000. The other thing this bill did was it also, the death benefit for on state active duty orders was $808,000, or $8,800. And we know healthcare costs, or I should say, funeral costs are skyrocketing. So what it does is actually increases their reimbursement for burial expenses, so to speak, goes up to $20,000. So there's just some benefits there. 1235 is another military bill, and this is something we've been kind of worked on for the last 2 years. But we now have a new component of the Armed Forces, is the Space Command. We don't have anybody in Indiana yet, but we just added them to our uniformed services. The Veterans Home, we have about 100 empty beds. And so what we did is change the requirement to be a resident. Currently, right now, you have to be a year resident in the state of Indiana before you qualify. What this does is you can immediately come to our state, go to the Veterans Home, but you have to establish a residency within the first 6 months. So we can start helping veterans, and honestly, it creates more money because the federal government reimburses us. So it's like let's get some soldiers in these beds that we can help. And we're looking at how we can do kind of a hospice program with that too. So that's kind of a different realm because there's a lot more federal regulations on that. So a couple little things. There's a disability rating that we put in there, and a lot of people don't understand this, but if you're disabled while you're doing your duties as a soldier, it used to be that you could get a certain amount of your children's tuition reimbursement done. And so we kind of cut that back a few years ago, and we're trying to put it back. So we kind of put that back in there that if you're actually injured and have a disability rating in the state of Indiana, that you can use a state school at some discounted rate for tuition. And then the last thing is everybody probably knows Sammy Davis. Well, Sammy Davis has Medal of Honor plates, right? I think he has 3 plates. Well, currently, the way the code is, there's no benefit, but if you're a prisoner of war, you get a lot more benefits. It's mostly parking issues and stuff, so we kind of threw that in there for Sammy, just because so you can park someplace free, like the museum and stuff like that, so it's kind of a nice little thing there. 1637 is actually Governor Braun's part of his agenda, which is the school safety board. So what I was able to do over the last 8 months was actually not increase government, but we took people from the Department of Education, people from Homeland Security, and already an existing board, and kind of combined them and got rid of a few employees. There's already one full-time position on this executive or this board, so we just changed that. And that now became the director of the Office of School Safety. So we're able to create this Office of School Safety without increasing government, technically decrease government a little bit. So we were able to get that through, and it was a great working with both of the agencies because nobody really wants to lose. So it was nice working with them. Everybody kind of agreed. The other thing that's in there, it's significant here locally more is so working with the firefighters, volunteer, professional, paid, and all those is right now you have to get a permit every time you want to do training, fire training. Like this, this is one of those things where I'm trying to deregulate stuff, and that made no sense. So literally went with IDEM and said, look, we're no more of this stuff. They can train anytime they want. They don't have to fill a permit out. They don't have to pay you guys anything. So we're able to get that, kind of deregulate that a little bit. And then the other thing, and if there's any builders in here, I'm continuously trying to get on Homeland Security to say, you got too many regulations. And so they now have a list of projects that do not require a plan review by the state. So your architect is still required by law and is liable for any imperfections, that kind of stuff. But at least the state's no longer taking their 4 or 5 months to get that kind of approved because they really don't need it because they don't really do anything. They just look at it, stamp it, and send it back to you, and nothing happens. So they realize that we're going to start deregulating those kind of things. Here's something that might be controversial in this area. I didn't know it was, but House Bill 1044. Now, the guy that's the author, I'm just helping him get it done. I call it liquefaction of human remains, and he says, no, absolutely not. It's actually alkaline hydrolysis. I didn't realize how controversial it'd be, but it's an interesting concept. Instead of a cremation, you have this acid breakdown of the body, and then you dispose of it different ways. And so it was something that obviously our Catholic faith around here is not real keyed up about, but it is moving forward. I think it's an option as we go forward. Senate Bill 95, I'm actually the sponsor of, and what we're seeing is across the state is the Jasper police will hire somebody, they'll train them, and then within that year they go to somewhere else that's making a lot more money. So what we're able to put in the statute is going to say, look, the first year you have to pay X amount %. The second year, the receiving department had to pay the next amount, and then if they, after that 3-year mark, if they've served that community, then the receiving agency wouldn't have to pay anything. But it's just a way to where we can say, look, don't poach the guys until they're after that 3 years. So it kind of helps with the financial burden of the local communities losing officers to bigger departments with more budget. So. Senate Bill 138 is a low THC. So I'm a big believer. I think I've said this before when I did my surveys, and surveys are important. I keep reminding everybody, please fill out your surveys. We do look at them, we read them, we use them to vote and make decisions. When we agreed, everybody said they wanted to raise the smoking and tobacco, not really smoking, but use of tobacco to 21. I was personally against it because of my military background. It was like that one thing that when you got out of basic training, it's like, hey, I can have a chew and a smoke, and even though I didn't do it, it just felt like cool to do it. So I was kind of against it, but 78% of my district through my surveys in 2 years said they wanted to do that. Well, the one thing we have not done is done the same thing for these low THC, these CBD, and these these vape things. So what I'm doing is we'll actually make sure that those all become 21 availability, and also we're looking at labeling and some other protections on those products. And then there's a bill out there for VSOs, Veteran Service Officers. It's coming over from the Senate. We don't have a lot of consistency across the state, and there's these guys and girls are basic employees of the county, and there's some minimal training, but there's not a lot of checkup. And I think that to help commissioners, actually, they don't know what they should be doing all the time. So we're looking at this checks and balances to where the state Department of Veterans Affairs will kind of do some overseeing and help guide those folks so that's kind of standard across Indiana. And the last thing I'll talk about is 1245. I'm always, most of my district have issues with state and federal property, so there's not a lot of taxes coming into the locals, but we still are required to provide those public safety issues down there. You don't see state ambulance, so if there's going to be a medical, we the communities have to do that. There are DNR law enforcement, but generally they're limited in where they are, and so you always see either the county sheriff or locals. So we still have to provide those services on these properties, but don't get anything in return. So we were able to get a bill passed to where we can start taking about $1 per car that goes through, go back to local communities, and hoping we start using that for public safety. So that's kind of it in a nutshell, and I'll turn it over to our congressman.
Mark, I think we'll give you a little bit of time, and then we'll open it up for questions, because most of them are probably state-related questions,
Okay.
but you never know.
Okay, so, there might be some of both, you never know. So go ahead and talk now or let the question, oh, sure, okay. Well, just an update of what's been going on out in Washington. To date, we've passed 56 bills or resolutions, and about 90% are bipartisan, maybe probably 95. I mean, it's really not much different than at the state level. You think all you guys ever do is fight. There's a lot of stuff that we work together on. Some bills that I introduced this year, one was House Resolution 1018, and it ended up getting amended into an overall bill, and it was a bill that I carried at the Senate level a couple years ago, requiring, at the time, it required any foreign adversary that donates to college or university in Indiana to report their transactions to the Attorney General's office. We did that at the state level, and we mirrored most of the existing federal legislation at the time, but the window of reporting at the federal level was $250,000 and above, and we made the state level $50,000 and above. And so part of House Resolution 1048 lowered that threshold at the federal level also to $50,000, and my bill that got amended into it required the Department of Education to retroactively share all information and reports from foreign funding sources to our colleges, and then in 3 years, recommend how to improve the coordination and enforcement of foreign gift sourcing. So 1018 went into 1048, which we eventually passed on the floor. Another bill that I've got is House Bill 1238, and it authorizes the president to use what they call letters of marque and reprisal, which is part of the constitutional Article 1 authority for the president, but the Congress has to authorize it, and use letters of marque and reprisal to go after assets of the drug cartels, cartel members, or any cartel-linked organizations, since the Mexican drug cartels have been classified as a terrorist organization. We can authorize him to issue letters of marque and reprisal to let, and it was primarily used in the past during war to allow private maritime companies to seize assets of our foreign adversaries, by the Navy or on Navy vessels. But this also would allow them to seize the assets of the drug cartels, either on water or on land, and work with private companies to contract with them to help impound assets of cartel members. And the third bill that I've got is House Joint Resolution 15, and there was multiple energy standards that had rules pushed out over the last year or two. This one deals with if you have a commercial water heater in a restaurant, a school, a laundromat, a hotel, like you've got. I mean, any commercial gas water heater, and the efficiency level of a typical commercial gas water heater is between 80 and 83%. And the Department of Energy passed a rule last year that requires every commercial user to use a 96% efficient condensing water heater starting in October of 2026. And that's about 2 to 3 times the cost to do it. And a 96% efficient water heater only produces 96% efficiency when the water is about 100 degrees. Well, can you wash laundry at a hotel with 100-degree water? Can your showers work at 100 degree? I mean, the temperatures where they get 96% are never what are used in, you know, a commercial kitchen, a high school cafeteria. I mean, anywhere that's got commercial water heaters, you operate them, you know, between usually 140 and 160. Number one, the higher you run the temperature, and then you've got a mixing valve, you know, downstream that gets you, if you have to have lower water temperatures for hand sinks or other things, that allows you to allow the water heater to be smaller, a smaller footprint. But when you get to 140, 150, 160 degree water temperature, the operating efficiency of these commercial high efficiency water heaters is 86%. And so you're going to require every tens of millions of these to be replaced with a product that costs two to three times, you know, the amount to put in to save a very small sliver. And you'd never get that money back on energy efficiency. If it was truly 96% at 160 degrees, maybe it would. But, you know, for that 3 to 4% differential in efficiency, you'd never get the tens of thousands of dollars back that you're going to pay to get it. Some bills that I've co-sponsored, got several of those. Like I said, that ultimately House Resolution 1048 that basically mirrored what we did at the state level on the bill that I authored a couple years ago, that any foreign adversary, China, Russia, North Korea, that donates, you know, now down to $50,000, you know, has to be reported. House Resolution 1028 protects women in Olympic and Amateur Sports Act. Really falls right in line with another one we passed, House Bill 28, protecting women in sports act that covered K through 12 up through NCAA sports, and then the HR 1028 covered, you know, all Olympic sports and other amateur sports. We just don't need men participating in women's sports. It's just that simple. We passed that, what, 3 years ago at the state level. HJR 12, I co-sponsored that'll put term limits in for House and Senate members, three terms for House members, 2 terms for Senate members. And the first bill that we passed in the House and the Senate, it was House Bill 29, Senate Bill 5, the Lake and Riley Act, and it was the first bill signed into law by President Trump. Any illegal alien that commits a violent crime, burglary, theft, larceny, or causes the death of another person, you know, is deported immediately. And the first illegal alien deported because of that law was in Indiana. He had a traffic accident. He was an illegal alien driving without a license, caused a wreck. A person was killed in the wreck, and he wasn't convicted of you know, manslaughter or anything, you know, in that, but he did cause the death of another person, and he was deported. I believe it was probably just a few weeks after the law had passed. We have several bills that I've co-sponsored on or voted for, repealing a multitude of you know, Green New Deal, energy efficiency mandates that the Department of Energy pushed through the last year of Biden's administration. One was going to ratchet up the efficiency mandates on washing machines, kitchen stoves, appliances of all kinds. You know, and when we do those by what we call the House Joint Resolution, it's a simple majority in the House, simple majority in the Senate, can't be filibustered, and then signed by the President, and then it can repeal any rule that any bureaucratic agency adopts. Another one, by 2029, they're no longer be able to make electric water heaters for residential use. At that point, you'll have to put a heat pump water heater in. And heat pump water heater manufacturers have found out they don't generate water fast enough to satisfy most customers, and so you know what they put in the heat pump water heaters to make them work? An electric element. And so what do you have? A heat pump water heater that costs 3 times the amount, takes up twice the space, and accomplishes a little to nothing. Another one that ratcheted up the instantaneous water heater efficiency mandates, a rule to require a methane emission charge for industrial customers, or, you know, producers across the country, would have resulted in billions of dollars of methane emissions charges. And one, we bundled it, just a whole bunch of them into HR 77. Pretty much anything that the Biden administration passed out in the last quarter of the year, and they pushed out dozens of them. HR 77 was a bill that put a whole bunch of rules into repeal. House Concurrent Resolution 14, which the House passed on, I think it was February 25th, sets the stage for extending the 2017 Jobs and Tax Cut Act tax provisions, which will, if we don't pass it, it'll lead to about a $4,000 average tax increase for most families. In that also is the 199A small business 20% tax credit that puts small businesses on the same net tax rate as the normal business tax. The business tax rate is 21% currently, and that was made permanent in 2017. And the 199 deductions allow millions of small business owners. I think there's over 60,000 sub-S corporations in Indiana, and all of those would be your normal small businesses, all kinds of LLCs. It puts small business on equal footing, with the large corporate tax rates, and those are not millionaires and billionaires. And the average taxpayer is by far the vast majority of the beneficiary of extending the tax cuts, and those are not millionaires and billionaires. There's R&D tax credits renewal that expired a couple years ago, and within that bill, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. We have eight committees that have been required to come up with some cuts, and so Energy and Commerce has to come up with $880 billion in cuts, and that's over 10 years. That's not 1 year, and the tax extensions, whether we can extend them, 5 years, 10 years, permanent, we'll just have to see what cuts we can come up with, cuts in spending, and the resolution requires to come up with at least $1.5 trillion in cuts over 10 years, and a goal of getting to $2 trillion, but we need to come up with at least $1.5 trillion. Education and workforce needs to come up with $330 billion cuts over 10 years, agriculture, $230 billion in cuts over 10 years, government oversight and government reform, $50 billion, transportation and infrastructure, $10 billion, natural resources, $1 billion, and financial services, $1 billion. And some of those committees think they can do more, but you have to come up with provisions that you're going to try to implement, and then the Congressional Budget Office has to score it. And so you come up with your recommendation out of your committee, CBO scores it, and whatever they score it, that's the credit you get, for those cuts. And we've all seen the commercials. We've seen social media posts. Republicans want to slash Medicaid, slash Medicare, and slash Social Security. All not true. We were told in 2015 when the state adopted the Medicaid population expansion, and at the time the federal government was reimbursing at 90%. And our House and Senate leadership came to the House and Senate, back in 2015 and said, it's not going to stay 90% forever. Be ready for the day it drops to 80 or 70 or 60, and the overall reimbursement for elderly, disabled, children, the federal government reimburses 70% of the cost for those folks. The able-bodied men and women ages 18 to 54 with no kids, the federal government reimburses that at 90%. And they told us back in 2015, if you expand it, be ready for the day that it drops to 70, like all the rest of your reimbursements. And I've already talked to Rod Berry, I've already talked to Todd Houston, and they said, we are prepared for the day that comes. We will not cut anybody. No one in Indiana will get kicked off of Medicaid. No one. The state would make that decision, not the federal government. And if we do, that would be enough under Energy and Commerce to pay for their entire, $880 billion over 10 years. But some of that's going to trickle down to the states. And in 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, the House has passed the cigarette tax many times. And we all agreed in 2015, we're going to hold increasing the cigarette tax till the day that reimbursement rate drops from 90 to 70. So there's something to pay for it. And I'm pretty sure on the Senate side of the budget this year, they're looking at it. They've got till the end of April to act on it, and I would say probably make it a conditional increase based on, when our budget reconciliation, process moves through. If we end up taking that from 90 to 70, then have a trigger, on the cigarette tax to cover the state's, extra cost for that. That was our plan the last 10 years, to do that when that inevitability came along, and that alone would take care of Energy and Commerce's provisions that they need to cover. Other committees, each going to go into their content area, look at places where they can cut things. But we can't sustain the level of debt this country has accumulated. We just can't do it. There will come a day, and we may be close to the point of no return anyway, but if we don't start cutting our national debt, we are all going to be in a heap of trouble. Our kids are going to be in a heap of trouble, because those bills get paid by one of two ways. Extremely higher tax rates or runaway inflation, and we've already seen the inflation trigger kick in when the government spends more than it's got, and we rack up trillions of dollars of debt. And we've already seen the inflation beast kick in a little bit after all the money spent during COVID, and we just have to turn it. We have to turn the ship, and we're not going to get it done overnight. And this is all over a 10-year window. And what we don't get done this year in budget reconciliation, we can bring back next year in budget reconciliation. But we have to start turning the trajectory, or this country is going to be in trouble. Another bill that I co-sponsored and voted for, Protecting American Energy Petroleum Act. It would ban the EPA from putting out restrictions on fracking unless ultimately Congress would approve it. But we can't have fracking is the only way we've been able to increase our natural gas and oil production in this country that we've all been the beneficiary of the last 10 years. And so that would prohibit the EPA or Department of Energy from banning fracking. The Halt All Lethal Trafficking of Fentanyl Act. The fentanyl was about to be rolled off the controlled one substance list, and HR 27 made sure fentanyl is considered a class 1 substance, so it didn't become a legal substance on our streets. The Born Alive Act. If a child is born alive from a failed abortion, HR 21 requires medical personnel to do what they can to help that child survive. Preventing Violence Against Women Act. It really, I think most of it ended up getting covered under Senate Bill 5. HR 21, the Lake and Riley Act. I think HR 29 and HR 30 had some of the same provisions in it. Senate Bill 5 that ended up being the blending of those two, protects women from violence from illegal aliens and requires them to be deported immediately. So with that, we'll turn it over to questions.
I shout out a question mark, just easy. Are you guys any closer to getting rid of daylight? Or just
Yes.
time zone?
Yes.
The same?
Yes.
Won't be in time, I can assure you of that.
I think there was a news story yesterday or today that, yeah, I think it's a Senate bill that's moving to, and I think last year the Senate passed it and the House didn't. But I am all for it. Yeah. I'm really ambivalent whether you lock it in at standard time year round or daylight savings time year round. Yeah. Yes.
Let's see. Okay. I think we'll start with this first question. This is from, I am going to say, Tom Schraring. Tom probably gets the award for attending most of these legislative breakfasts throughout the period of time. So in respect to him, I'm going to ask his question first. How strong is the push to force small utilities who are outside the IURC to have to go back into the IURC? There's that question.
I'm becoming more and more involved with utilities just because of the Rockport issue, but I have not heard that push. I think that there's pros and cons to that concept, but it has not been a heated or nor really repeated conversation in my circles.
Okay, so this is kind of for all of you. What is the best way to get an actual answer from elected officials who are supposed to be public servants? And remember, I'm just reading this. An email only gets an automated thank you, but no other answer. A phone call goes to voicemail and no reply. An entry on the website form disappears into cyberspace with no reply. These are barriers to the public.
Well, I can answer that. I mean, if that's happened to me, you're not calling me directly. I give everybody my cell phone, so that should never happen. If you call my staff, there is a delay. If you email my staff, there's a delay because they review it, they log it, and it comes to me. But I'm accessible directly. Now, during session, it may be a day or two sometimes, just because of the days. But I wouldn't think it would happen for me. If it does, come up here and grab at me.
Yeah, I would agree. I think we've shared our cell phones from here in the past. I'm happy to do so again. 812-639-7547. I've talked to several of you in the room here. So, like Representative Bartels said, there are times that I know that there is a disconnect. I wish I could sit here and say that I've received every message that came to the State House directed to me that went through the system at the State House. I know I haven't. So if that's happened to you, trying to get me, I apologize. But I've tried to be as accessible as possible to, to whomever. So, yeah, 812-639-7547.
317-446-1326. The first time you do it, text me so I know who you are and put you on my phone.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, 317-446-1326. Shout out to everybody else.
And I would agree with those guys. Sorry. I would appreciate it if you bring your name, put your name with it. But mine's 812-631-3856. Reach out anytime. But while we're in session, it might take a minute or two, but I will respond.
Okay, so this is kind of regarding, I guess, Senate Bill 1, but moving decision-making to the local level is appropriate. Government should be efficient and value-added. Talk about the view of road funding through the Community Crossings Grant Program. Communities rely on this program to maintain roads. If wheel and excise tax is required to qualify for the grant funding, how does that become a requirement? So basically, why is the Community Crossings Grant Program connected to the wheel excise tax program?
Okay, I'll start. I would like to, I guess, if we're talking SB1, I'll give a little bit more of a background on that, just for clarification, then we'll move on to that. But as we're moving and as at the state level, I don't know the percentage setting in this room, but there's a lot of people clamoring for more property tax relief. And then there's also the group that doesn't want as much tax relief because they're concerned about local services. So there's both ends of the spectrum that we're getting pushback from. So what I would like to say and just explain, Indiana has the 5th best property tax foundation, ranks as 5th in the nation and best in the Midwest for most competitive property tax system. So we have to keep that in mind, that everybody's upset because we had a drastic increase in property taxes. They've went up. There's no doubt about that. There's a lot of reasons for that. We're working on fixing that. But any relief that we do give on property taxes, we have to understand that that's a direct cut on local services. So we're very cognizant of that at the state level. I agree exactly with whoever said that. I've been doing my best, and that's my priority, is to drive decisions to the local level, because I think we're going to make the best decisions that we can. If it's driving them from the federal government to the state government or state government to the local, we can make the best decisions. But we need to find the balance. And everything that we do to reduce property taxes, we're trying to limit and shrink the size of government. Now, if we have to move and use local income taxes to balance that out, the problem with that is we don't want to be shifting too much from property taxes to income taxes, because if you take too much from property taxes to income taxes, income taxes are not paid by large corporations. They're not paid by large businesses. Property taxes are paid by all of us. Property taxes are paid by multinational corporations or whoever. Local income taxes are only paid by individuals. So I like the concept of local income taxes. Gives us discretion as local elected officials to do what we need to do, and if there's support from the local people, then we do it. But that's one of the reasons that you saw a reduction from the first iteration of Senate Bill 1, and I don't know if that's a word or not, but from Senate Bill 1 to what it is now, because we don't want to create that fundamental shift. We want to find a balance. Now, for the people that think, so I was talking about the people that want more property taxes, why we're not doing it. Now, the people that want less property tax cuts, here's basically right now that 200 million that we're talking about, that will basically be going to a limited number of places. First-time home buyers. If your income would be less than $75,000 and you buy a home of $250,000 or less, you would basically get a $2,500 per year property tax credit, okay? So first-time home buyers, incentivizing that. Senior citizens and disabled veterans, raising that threshold, assessed value threshold up to $300,000. And then also, seniors on fixed incomes, because of the drastic increase in assessed valuations, or some of them are struggling. If the majority of the value of their wealth is in their home, we're not wanting to force them out of their home. So there is also an option for county government to give a $500 tax credit, push their property taxes off until the selling of their home. It's an option, it's not a mandatory. But those are the basic things. And then also for the ag community, landowners, changing the capitalization rate from 8% to 9% would reduce tax assessed valuation. So that would be a small decrease there. Those are the basic only tax cuts. That's where the tax cuts would be. And I think those are valuable places to cut property taxes. It's not going to affect people making a lot of money that are in their prime and working. So those are basically where that would be. And think about this: is the smaller cuts, then the rest of the reduction is going to be a loss of potential future revenue. It's a lot easier to manage loss of future revenue than it is to take tax cuts. And on the community crossings and wheel tax, they're basically trying to make sure local governments, Du Bois County has a wheel tax, and I'm not sure of all the others. They're wanting to, it's another way to have the decision-making at the local level, if we can. That story's not written on that as well. We're halfway through the session, so I guess one add to that would be continue to reach out to us, we're the megaphone for you guys. I'm the megaphone for the 6 counties, and everybody says megaphones. We're still working on those. Obviously, any suggestions are welcome. I'm not for sure on the details on the community crossings.
Yeah, I'll be brief. I would agree with what Senator Schmitt said on the wheel tax specifically. We had a lot of discussions. That bill started on the House side. It's still a work in progress. There are a couple parts of the bill that I was troubled with not necessarily the idea of enacting a wheel tax. I do think the phrase there for locals was, I think, skin in the game. Just making sure that locals were maximizing the tools that were available as a local control option if you were looking to increase your funding locally. Now, what we heard through discussions were that there were some communities who were funding, that were adequately funding their communities without wheel tax. They had other means of revenue that would preclude those communities potentially, unless they enacted an additional tax, which they didn't need. So I think that there's, as Senator Schmitt said, there's going to be some work that, in my opinion, still needs to be done on that. But I am not opposed to conceptually having locals enact that tax if they want to. I think that the idea is that sometimes we look to the state to do all the funding, where this is a saying, if you need additional funding, there are tools that you've been given to the locals, and I know, we'll have additional conversations with some of the locals here as we go on, but I think that was the gist of the conversation as far as that goes, so.
I only had one thing. What you don't realize that we did and fought and changed in the House before everybody really saw this was when that concept was come out, it was if your local tax could be 5% on something and you only had a 2.5, that means you would only get 50% of the grant. We're able to get that part out of there at least to say, well, we don't do that, especially when we talk about population of county government. You get somebody that's 12,000 or less people. How does that make sense? So one of the things you don't realize is we did make it better, if you could say anything. But so that's just wanted to add that. So
that has been part of the argument on community crossings since the very first year we passed it, and it took a lot of. And Luke Kenley was the one pushing that in the Senate the first year we had community crossings discussions on the table. We talked him out of that for the reason, the community crossings requires a match already from local government. We also made sure small counties had a lower ratio of match than big counties. Because, there's a difference between what small counties can afford and what large counties can afford. What the cap of the grant is the same for everybody. So getting Kenley to agree to put tiers in for small counties versus big, and to get off his obsession for he just wants to force local government to pass a wheel tax. He says you're not taking advantage of the taxing authorities you have, and it was a arm twist to try to force counties to adopt wheel tax that didn't do it. But if they're not doing it, maybe their community just doesn't need it.
All right, here's another one about reduction of property taxes. Concerning that, what is the House Ways and Means Committee doing about addressing replacement of funds to cities and towns? The town of Ferdinand stands to lose over $200,000 in 2028.
So I think that the thing we have to be careful of is, as I've been reading articles and things like that, we keep talking about cutting the budgets. So I've got, as the Senate Bill 1 stands right now, it's not been changed. Senator Schmitt mentioned it was first heard on Wednesday, I think it was. It was a several hour-long meeting. They ended at 10:30. They did no amendments to the bill, so technically, as Senate bill left the Senate, it is still the same bill. So I've got numbers here, and I'm happy to show some of the locals here that I know have a lot of concerns over this bill. From LSA. LSA is Legislative Services Agency. They're nonpartisan. They work for the State House, they work for both Republicans and Democrats. Anytime we pass a bill or have a bill under consideration, they run, at least they have a fiscal arm that runs the numbers. How is this going to impact the state? How is this going to impact locals? According to their projections, I've got Du Bois County here, and again, happy to show you all when we're done, but there are no actual cuts to any local unit, not to Jasper, not to Du Bois County, not to Ferdinand, respectfully. It's what we're talking about here, and I just want to be clear, it's a reduction in the increase. So there's still an increase that can happen at Ferdinand or Jasper or Du Bois County. You just won't get as much under the current Senate Bill 1 as you would have under current law. Okay, so no cuts, and I've said that a couple times. I think Senator Schmitt said it a couple times. So I just want to be careful with our, semantically careful up here that there's not actually a cut. Now, to be fair, it's still a significant reduction to the potential increase, right? And so I definitely acknowledge that. So as far as replacing that, I don't. There's not been a discussion that I'm aware of to replace those reduction in the reduction of the increase. So, again, I think some of the numbers I've run, like I said, the state is looking at increasing about 2% in their budget. Not everybody, but a lot of the local taxing units had about a 1 to 2% increase allowed under the property tax caps, which is again, not out of line with what the state itself is trying to do as far as tightening the belt. So I know that is completely unsatisfactory to some of you sitting here. And again, I'm happy to run these numbers and make sure that the numbers I have are accurate compared to what you all are seeing as well, as far as, you know, cities and towns and counties representatives that are sitting here. So, hopefully that answers your question.
Well, I would echo that too, and we'll talk and look at my numbers, but I'm not showing near that much of a decrease. So he's right. The trick is some of these that they're calling decreases are just it's just a decrease in future revenue. It's not actually a cut. So.
The only thing I'd say, there has been a couple discussions about local sales tax, to where we can pass on that tax to the users and not necessarily just property. So it's not gone very far, but it's been kicked around. Obviously, we're not going to see it this year, but it's something I think we might see in the future.
Yeah, there's a broader discussion on property taxes, generally speaking, that involves that. I don't think that's, as Representative Bartels said, I don't think that's going to happen this year, but I think there's a broader discussion. I think whatever happens with Senate Bill 1 this year, I think most people agree, is probably more of a Band-Aid than anything else. How do we address this issue going forward is, I think, a larger discussion. It's a discussion that's been going on since before I got in the legislature, though, from what I understand. So.
All right, here's just a comment. It's from Aaron Meyer. He's the legislative director with ABATE of Indiana. ABATE of Indiana thanks you for your support of all Hoosier motorcyclists on issues such as fuel labeling, road funding, and autonomous vehicle oversight. So, thank you for making that comment.
There's a bill that's not getting much traction, but they're talking about and weighing in with the farmers how you have to have a setback from corners. So, you know, we're looking at those safety issues too.
Okay, this is a whole pile of questions about education. So I'm just going to read through a couple of them. They're all kind of interrelated. Senate Bill 1002 defines family-friendly school designations. What does this mean? We'll kind of just start with that one.
I don't have the answer
sorry,
personally for that directly. It's House Bill 1002, right? Yeah. Yeah, that's the, Representative Bartels mentioned that. That's the, broadly speaking, a deregulation bill for public education. Representative Bartels mentioned that. One thing I've heard from teachers consistently, I know several of us have, that resonates with me is cut the regulation, just let us teach. And I think House Bill 1002 is, broadly speaking, an attempt to do that. That provision I don't have an answer to, so. But I can look and find out, whoever asked the question, if you want to.
Here's some other ones
Okay.
on 1002. Cutting back on counselors who will care for suicidal, abused, trafficked kids, especially when looking for help from their parents. What is the plan? Again, Indiana ranks number 43 among highly educated states. How does this bill help this number to go up? It eliminates resources for students, and House Bill 1002 cuts on technical subjects, social workers, and more. What will be put in place for the kids who need a creative outlet, such as those learning to cook, clean, laundry, and those type of things?
Well, just to address some of that, I mean, I have a bill that I was hoping to get amended in an education bill, which is basically the teacher compensation, where right now it's 62% has to go to pay for teachers when it comes out of the budget for schools. I think right now we're sort of looking, it's going to go 65, but more importantly, when it comes to these mental health counselors, whether it's contract-based or employee-based, I wanted that pay to contribute to that 62 or 65%. So very supportive. I want to incentivize school corporations to have mental health counselors, whether it's in-house or where they actually use a contract system. So obviously that portion of the bill, obviously no support for me on that. So.
On Senate Bill 1, do you understand the impact of this on our public schools? Property taxes pay for student transportation to schools, facility costs like utilities, building upkeep, classroom resources. Where are our schools going to get this number for their shortfall? And nearly every school corporation here is going to lose funds with the current budget, and now there is no separate line item for textbooks and curricular materials, which is an additional cost. Then can the complexity index be adjusted to help rural schools?
Yeah, I mean, we were just briefly, the textbook portion is rolled into 1001. So I think we're kind of fixed that issue. We got to be careful because we've met with some school corporations together, and we went back and made sure there is not a cut. There just is a less increase, and we've just got to be careful when we say that. But more importantly, I said this kind of jokingly, but it's true. I said, what is the school corporation's truly major problem when it comes to funding? And it's that we, as a society, are not having as many kids, right? I mean, our schools were built based on the number of kids, and they kept increasing. We built more schools, and families are not having the same amount of children, and some families are having 0 children. And so we have to at least accept the fact that's a factor in the school board finances issues. So then when we look at stuff, it's like if you just had the number of students you did 2 years ago, everybody was like, oh, it would be great. And I'm like, well, we got to figure out how to have more kids, I guess. But I mean, I say that kind of flippantly, but it's true.
Yeah, so 2 different issues as I've talked to teachers that I think the issue is somewhat getting conflated. There's House Bill 1001, which is the budget. That is an overall increase in education funding, 4% over the biennium. So that is separate, though, because that's state funding, where local property tax is the local funding component of it. So when it comes to education, the state kicks in 64%, I think, of state funding. Local income tax contributes 20-some percent, 24%, something like that. Federal is the rest. So the vast majority comes from the state. That is, though, inculcated in House Bill 1001 in the budget, and there's a 4% increase there. Yes, I think we do understand the impact, potentially, that Senate Bill 1 will have on local units, whether it's schools, towns, or whatever. Again, no cuts as the bill stands, just a reduction of the increase. It's a significant reduction, I acknowledge that. And is it at the right place right now? I don't know. I think that those are certainly difficult decisions to make. As I said, though, at the state, we're looking at similar reductions of our increase going forward. So, I don't know, is that all the question, I think, basically?
Here's one more concerning education. Governor Braun wants to increase teacher pay. How do schools do that when he is also decreasing education funds?
Yeah, so if this is Senate Bill 1, so generally speaking, I haven't looked at every school around here, but none of the ones I have looked at, none of the teachers are paid through property taxes. They're paid through the school funding mechanism, essentially. So SBIll 1 theoretically would have, now there might be an outlier here as far as some of the schools in District 63, but most of them don't have any form of income affecting school teacher pay. And so now it's going to impact other things, certainly, as the previous question indicated. Capital projects, school buses, maintenance, those kind of things are certainly something that will have to be discussed and looked at.
All right, so how much money does Indiana have in reserve? If we were in good shape operating as we were, why hurt communities, counties, libraries, airports, et cetera, just for bragging rights?
Yeah, I think we're still under $2 billion. Yeah, and as far as, I think it's like anything else. If we start using our cash reserve as an operational concept, we're never going to have the ability to protect ourselves in some really bad times. I think it's 45 days. We can, if things really hit the fan, we could survive only 45 days. Now, we don't expect catastrophic, but the intent here is, if you notice, as that reserve built up, we take out of that reserve and we're like reducing debt. So the intent here is to keep that cash reserve always there. As we continuously add to it, we take that back out and reduce our debt. I think that once we pay off the teacher's pension, there's an extra $1 billion in revenue that the state can use for other projects. So I think we're trying to reduce our debt and make sure we have that cash reserve just like anybody would in case, there's a rainy day kind of thing. So.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think one thing that impressed me when I got to the legislature, this had been done before I got there, is Indiana operates on an honestly balanced budget the way, any of us would do. So as a state, we're spending less than we're taking in. There are some reserves there, as Representative Bartels indicated, and if I get reserves in my house, my choice typically is to pay down any debt that I may have. I'm a Dave Ramsey guy, and I think the state has done that pretty well. There was a year or 2 years ago, we actually sent some money back to the taxpayers. Now, I heard some folks say that wasn't that much. Nevertheless, we did send some money back to the taxpayer. So the goal is not to have bragging rights, to constantly or perpetually increase that reserve fund. It's just, I would argue, it's just to be responsible. I mean, we all hopefully have got some savings at home, for a rainy day, for some sort of catastrophic emergency. I think that's the state's approach here.
Daryl, did you want to comment on that?
And yes, and it actually, that is shrinking. And you guys can help me. The goal is like you're saying, what is it, 10% or 12%? But I think we're actually down to 10. Can you help me with the number, Mark, that they talk about in the Senate side? There's a, okay. Then when it gets over 12, that's when we received the refund checks, correctly? Okay. Now that whatever that percentage was last year, it's actually falling 1 odd percent. So it's a significant. We're actually eating into our reserves. It's a significant number. I don't know what it is, off the top of my head, but that is valid. But we are eating into that.
All right. We have about 10 minutes left, so I'll get through these questions. If I don't get to your question, I apologize. There's only just so much time for these questions. House Bill 1500 has vague criteria for stipend designation for teachers, granting the administrators the authority to pay a single teacher up to $10,000, and they quoted where that is. Why is the current system being replaced? It has defined criteria and was developed by legislators. Is the goal to allow administration to pick and choose recipients or pay fewer teachers?
I apologize. I'm trying to look up House Bill 1500 here.
There was something similar that went through the Senate that I think is going to the House side. And the goal there were struggling in certain school corporations being able to find teachers for STEM subjects. So they were trying to be able to incentivize certain STEM subjects that we were not able to find teachers and draw people from outside business and utilizing, I guess, real world experiences and trying to pull in. So I think that was the goal, was just to be able to fill seats that they were not be able to make hires in certain parts of the state.
I can't answer intelligently on it, but whoever asked the question, come up afterwards and I'll find an answer for you when we get back to the State House next week. So. Is it going to be about my intelligence? Okay. Yeah.
I've been in school psychology for 27 years in the DuBois County, Spencer County, Perry, Pike area. So I've been in every school building in this Full County area. And that was the intent of that proposal, was not only for those STEM instructors that we could not find, calculus, physics, those type of things, but also people like in my profession that just weren't staying. There is no. Let me give you an example. There's I think we're down to 4 school psychologists that cover 4 counties. And we had to hire out 100 outside evaluations because we can't cover it. There's nobody going into the degree field. There's nobody going. It's a similar type of shortage that we have in teachers, but even more magnified on those. I guess you could say the STEM subjects, the higher level math, the higher level physics. So that was part of the intent, was trying to attract those people to come from the private sector. I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just thought some.
That's actually a different part of the bill. That one is about, on our evaluation, it's about replacing tag.
Well, what my point is there's got, and maybe that wasn't a specific point of the bill, but my point overall in that idea is we have to get away from the thought process of paying everybody the same based on, for example, I have lots of teachers approach me and ask why they get paid the same as someone down the hallway that takes on the rest of the difficult children. And I explained to them, you need to talk to your union rep and ask them why that's the case. We have to have a different mindset of how we're going to reward people that maybe have a different degree field or a different set of skills.
Come up and see me afterwards. I'd be interested to talk more about that. Thank you.
Okay, whether at the state or federal level, are any of you aware of any bills that would adjust banking regulations in any notable ways?
No.
Yeah, well, it's fun, not from our state, the stamp, because the banking association, I get with them several times, and actually, all they're doing is playing defense, so as long as we don't negative affect them, they have nothing they're pushing this year in the state.
I know in Energy and Commerce, Brett Guthrie said there were some banking regulations that they were looking at the repealing some of the, I mean, there was some CFPB, I'm not exactly sure. I mean, but there's bills coming in, you know, I mean, and once we get through budget reconciliation and all this, I mean, a lot of the regular order that we're going to, you know, hit, but there's going to be some push to repeal some of the Dodd-Frank. I mean, and especially small community banks, they get hit with the same regulations as Citibank, and they don't have the manpower, they don't have the attorney. I mean, they don't have the customer base to absorb some of the costs that it takes to comply, you know, with all the federal rules that are written. You know, those are written with a one-size-fits-all approach, which in any regulation, yeah, usually doesn't work. But there are some federal repeals looking at, in the works, but it'll be a few months till those things get started.
All right. Historically, the Indiana General Assembly has not supported bills that protect our environment and health. There are several House and Senate bills around clean water initiatives, and which do you support and why do you support them?
Is there a specific bill? I mean, can help us out?
I'm not sure who wrote that. Did you write that, Carla? No? He's left already. Okay. Thank you.
I mean, we mentioned a few bills earlier that deal with water issues, right? Protecting water as far as usage and things like that. A couple years ago, we passed a bill that increased something called a layer grant. Local lakes, rivers, lakes and streams layer, there's an acronym there, forgive me, that allowed money to go to locals, again, to clean up their streams, to clean up their lakes and things like that. So that was last year, the year before, we had that bill. So there have been things that we have, in fact, done to my preference, you know, and I deal with this some as chairman of natural resources, is to try to get funding to local units rather than having to try to fund everything through, funnel everything through natural resources. The southern portion of the state is vastly different geographically, topographically than the northern half of the state. So you know, we're going to have different issues there. So
I think the only other thing that if he was here and there was a comment about potentially negative impact that we're willing to allow, I think that, you know, the only other thing I can think of is with the wetlands bill, where it was controversial, but we were trying to put common sense that when, you know, when an agent of the state would go by and there's a farmer trying to dry up a couple of cattails because of some issues, and it's not really a wetland, and then there's this whole, you know, court issues and citations. We were trying to fix that. I mean, so yeah, I was very supportive. Like, let's have some common sense when it comes to those kind of issues. But
I do have one correction. Brett Guthrie and Andy Barr are in neighboring districts in Kentucky. It's Andy Barr who works on the finance. He's the chairman of the finance committee. He's the one working on. And if you look up bills that Andy Barr has either sponsored or co-sponsored, you could probably get a list of any of the banking regulations that he's working on. So sorry about wrong name, wrong committee, but right state.
Is it possible to use township trustee funds to gravel and pitch or ditch county roads?
yeah, so Chairman Pressel, he's the chairman of House Roads and Transportation. The bill that he's got that's dealing with the wheel tax that we were kind of referencing earlier, there is some language in there that has township money, a certain amount of township money going to county roads to be able to help on those if they're sitting on so much. Again, I'll just preface or end on that by saying that those numbers, you know, are going to be under discussion, I think, and hopefully, I think I'm supportive of that idea, allowing townships to be able to contribute in that regard. Hopefully, that stays in the Senate. We'll see how it goes, but so there is discussion on that specifically in that House bill as it left the House. So.
Okay. This is concerning cutting tax dollars. How will the reported $2 billion, I think that's a 2, of infrastructure work be taken care of? More chip and seal on state highways, and then still trying to push the Mid-States corridor. So basically talking about infrastructure work and how those things will be taken care of.
So again, the cuts that were mentioned are not exactly cuts. It's a reduction in any increase, and that is in a separate bill. That's in Senate Bill 1, which deals with local property taxes. The House Bill 1001 is broadly speaking, the budget that funding is increasing there as well. And that's where, like I said, we've had just south of a 2% increase in funding for the state of Indiana. That would be for highways. The chip and seal, I think, is a bad idea on highways. I know I've heard from a lot of people on that. I think, just frankly, NDOT's trying to stretch their dollar as well. And so they say that is by far the cheapest way to do it. I know, like I said, I hear about that more than about anything else as far as our local highways and how the state is handling that issue. So again, I've expressed my displeasure. I've expressed the displeasure of the several constituents that I've heard from, and I don't know that they have a plan to change that practice though at the moment. So.
Yeah, it's hard for us to plan when, especially when like community crossroads grants, when you put in the application and literally the cost of goods has gone up significantly over that grant. So, I mean, obviously local communities and the state itself is actually seeing that this money is not stretching as far as on roads that the plan is. And so, it's one of those things that we've got to revamp our thinking on how we do these projects until we can get a little more funding source, and whether it's wheel tax locally and those kind of things.
All right, we'll go down to two more questions. So Senate Bill 2501 and House Bill 1221 cover pension and retirement. Each year these bills come up for you. Can you please make these 13th checks permanent, or COLA? I don't really know what that means, but maybe you all do.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I mean, we want to make it permanent. I think we have, unless something happens, but so the House's intent. I can't speak for the Senate.
Right. If the question is so it doesn't come up every year, I think is maybe maybe what they're asking. I mean, because that is the issue. Every budget cycle it comes up, and we have to pass it again every budget cycle. So I think there have been discussions about making it permanent. I can't answer broadly speaking what the appetite is on permanency of that going forward. But I think generally speaking, we've been supportive of passing it when it comes up for discussion. So.
All right, so that pretty well takes care of those questions. Mark, we're going to leave with you with about a 1-minute response. How is the process at the federal level different for you from the state level?
Well, I was really surprised, the mechanics of how things function. We have a group out there called Legislative Council that is exactly the same as Legislative Services. It's like the state of Indiana went and looked at, how do the mechanics of government are set up in DC, they picked them up and just dropped them. So when the terms they use are different. We call a bill in committee, the second reading amendment, they call it a markup, but it's exactly the same. When you're in committee and you're amending bills, the process of amending them in committee to send them out to the floor is called a markup, and it's identical. I mean, the process of when you bring sometimes bills that passed last year, there's a procedure. Usually on Monday evenings, or Monday afternoon, evening, our first vote is what they call suspension of the rule votes to put stuff onto the calendar. So if a bill passed before, you can suspend the rules to recommit it to a committee to go through all of that. You can bring it straight to the floor, and that's called a suspension vote. And so Monday night is usually, anything that's going to show up on the calendar that week from a previously passed bill. You suspend the rules, to allow it, and the Rules Committee has to approve it to put it on the suspension calendar. But that's probably the only thing that's really different, and probably the other difference. So sometimes we vote at noon, sometimes we vote at 10, sometimes we vote at 4. The timing of the day of when we vote in the House and Senate, you have a set schedule. Committees are Monday and Tuesday morning, all day Wednesday, Thursday morning, and you have third reading, you have amending on the floor and third reading. I mean, they are set, and ours, the schedule seems to be a little bit helter-skelter, but somebody's in charge of the schedule. But so the time of the day you vote is a little different, but and usually the first vote that we cast, whenever there's a voting window of a half an hour or an hour, The first bill usually has a 15-minute window, so they hit the buzzers go off in all the offices, and you know the voting has started, and you got 15 minutes to get there for the first vote. But I've got 4 staff people that cover different policy areas. My legislative director, you know, he'll summarize each day. Here are the bills that are coming up. Here's a digest of what they do. Some of them have come through my committees. Some of them are, you know, bills that were passed last year, you know, and whether they were passed, you know, the vote count, whatever. He gives you information on what's being voted on that day. And usually at the beginning of the week, I know what's going to be voted on all week. I mean, we do know that. And when that first buzzer hits, you got to hustle over to the Capitol, get your first vote cast, and then after that, there are about 2 to 3 minutes, you know, for each vote. So if there's 4 or 5, the rest of them are you know, rapid fire after that. But so that's a little different, but the processes of how you get bills heard in committee, I mean, all that is really the same.
All right, do any of you want to have any closing comments so we can wrap up?
No, I just thank everybody for coming out. I appreciate your engagement. I appreciate, you know, telling your friends to come and engage in us. So thank you for your time.
Yeah, same. Appreciate y'all being here and happy to talk a little bit more for anybody who's interested.
Absolutely, I want to echo that. I mean, we all have to get together. We all have to work. We can all make a difference in our own way. And whatever everybody's level of 100% is, that's fine, as long as you continue to give 100%. When I got to you know, I didn't know what I was going to get into when I got to the State House. I knew it would be intense. I knew there would be a lot of controversy. But what I was encouraged by, there are a lot of good people trying to pull in the same direction. You know, we're just constituents. I'm a megaphone for 140,000 people. We're all up here trying to make a difference. You know, the easy thing is to not put yourselves out there. And thank you guys for coming in and participate. We just have to continue to do that and work to improve. So thank you very much.
I know we're over time, but I should have started with this. So I got the committee assignments that I really was shooting for in the House. So I got on House Armed Services Committee. They're the committee that sets the defense industry budget. Veterans Affairs and House Armed Services are 2 different, you know, content areas. But with the Crane in my district, it's the 3rd largest Navy base in the world, in the middle of Indiana, and vital to our economy. So I was thrilled to death to get on that. My second, and a close second, was agriculture, because in the 21 counties that I've got, agriculture is a big driver of the economy. And so being on those 2 were really my 1 and 2 goals. Right at the end of filling committees, our freshman steering committee rep called and said, "Will you take one for the team and take a 3rd committee?" I'm like, oh, crap. But they needed somebody on education and workforce. And I ended up getting on the Workforce Protection Subcommittee, so that really deals with OSHA regulations that, you know, I've got, you know, 36 years in business to, you know, and know about dealing with them. And the education discussions at the federal level are really the same as at the state level. So thrilled to be on those committees and look forward to represent the district well. Thank you.
All right, and when is the end of the state legislation session? April?
By statute, the 29th of April, midnight.
29th of April, all right. So you have
We
quite
hope
a
to be
ways
done
to
a week
go.
early.
All right, we are not planning on having any more of these sessions this year, but we may call them in sometime early summer and do kind of a recap of what's happened. I think we did that last year with some people from the state level. So anyway, thank you all for coming this morning, and we're going to wrap this up, and have a great day.